Chapter 202. That woman's a slicer. I want something sliced. Natalie was looking down the pedestrian-only street toward a woman with long, silky gray hair. The color of it matched the skirt the woman wore, as well as the mesmerizing droplets that flowed down the backs of her fingers. A young man had just dumped a mound of what looked like oversized ginger roots onto the folding table in front of her, and she was making patting gestures over and around the pile. "That doesn't look like a spell impression," Alden said, hurrying after Natalie, just as eager as she was to get a closer view of the magic. He'd parked the nanogun against the wall of a building half an hour ago. Their destination was near enough that they could have been there in minutes, but the Free Spell Saturday event was so much fun that they weren't rushing. The about offering free magical services were wearing system name tags that said so. Some of them had booths or were carrying equipment with them that made them more obvious in the crowd. Others were casually browsing shops or sitting outside cafes. Natalie hadn't activated her own name tag, but she had a brighter thing going on. She'd brought homemade sweets in her purse to offer people as thanks for their talents. Alden wished he'd known in advance that this event was taking place so that he could have thought of something similar. He couldn't even figure out how to describe his skill on his name tag to explain how he might be useful or amusing to others. They reached the woman with the folding table and stood behind a taped line on the pavement that indicated her space requirements. She had already finished with the roots. They were black inside, and she had cut them into tiny cubes. A pungent smell filled the air. The man who'd brought them was scraping them into a large, dark green box shaped like a Chinese takeout container. He tapped one of its corners and said a word that meant seal in her tone. When nothing happened, he repeated it, pronouncing the word slightly differently. After he failed a third time, Alden said, "I think you've got the wrong corner. It's that one there," Natalie was saying at the same time, pointing toward the one that looked a little more interesting. Sympathy for magic wasn't annoying when it was like this, just a nudge that made the correct corner stand out from the others. Some things that weren't even powerfully enchanted, as far as Alden knew, glowed and made him turn his head. He wondered if some Artonians thought that their fellow wizards would be too stupid to detect the relevant parts of their creations, so they responded by doing the magical equivalent of writing, "Press this one." Or, "Caution. Poking this part with your authority will break everything," in neon orange paint instead of keeping it subtle and trusting the end user to figure it out. The man with the roots pressed a finger to the corner Natalie had indicated and gave the seal instruction again. The thick flaps that formed the box's lid folded over and melted together. "Rabbits?" he asked. "Thank you, rabbits. Thank you, Netta. I will bring you the inker next week." Greater than. What were those roots, and what is an inker, and what is Natalie doing with that chocolate-covered pretzel stick? "You want to see?" the woman asked, smiling at Natalie as she put the pretzel stick on the table. "If you don't mind." "You're new to Unzidora," Netta said, no doubt tipped off by Natalie's accent. "Welcome. And you also." She was looking at Alden with eyes almost as silver as Natalie's were gold. He thought he would have known she wasn't avowed even if he'd met her on the street in Chicago instead of here in Apex. A little appeal, a blue tattoo peeking out of the neck of her shirt that looked more authentic than the decorative ones some people wore in imitation, flawless light brown skin that made it hard to settle on an age for her. Though something about the way she was looking at the two of them did make him assume she was oldish. "You're Mr. Matadero Party," she added. That's him. I made the turkey," Natalie announced. "I cook, and Alden makes this amazing shield around things that keeps them safe. You can give him ice cream and then hit it with a blowtorch and nothing happens to it." "I do this," said Netta. "Step closer. It won't be dangerous with a pretzel as long as you don't put your hands in the way." They stepped closer, standing shoulder to shoulder and watching as a bracelet she wore sent the silvery droplets rolling down the back of her left hand again. When they reached her fingertips, she flicked them off, and as they drifted through the air, they trailed slender filaments that stayed attached to her skin. The filaments stiffened a moment later, and she made the soft patting motion over the pretzel stick. It fell apart into penny-thin discs. With a beckoning gesture from their owner, the filaments retracted, became droplets once more, and slid back toward the bracelet. "That's a slicer for sure." Natalie's face said she was as delighted with the bracelet as Alden was. Netta's name tag did say, "slicing service," but that really didn't do her method justice. "It's your miser tool?" Alden asked. He thought the chances of the bracelet being crafted by Wright were slim, but if she said she had a bunch tucked away for sale and they could be used by anybody, he'd be happy to be wrong. "Yes," she said. "Small, but mighty. I don't think the system is satisfied with how I've grown into it. I haven't heard of it giving anyone else one, and I once had a wizard ask me if I really couldn't make the strands longer. But I like them just as they are. I don't think short claws are such a problem." Natalie gifted Netta a fresh pretzel stick. They purportedly tasted like a friend smiling at you or a hug, depending on who was describing it. "I've never tasted a smile before," Alden hinted as they left. They were walking past a table full of vocal brutes who were sipping tea from tulip-shaped glasses while their name tags offered free songs and sound entrapment. Not many people have. Natalie tucked the bag that held the pretzel sticks back into her purse. "Are the chocolate pretzels vegan?" he asked. "No, I'm sorry." "Lies." "Okay. Not lies." The ones she had just put in the purse weren't, but he had caught a glimpse of a smaller bag with a single pretzel stick in it, and the gremlin was cool with that one. "I should take a picture of your face and send it to Elijah and Hadassah," she said. "You've become cold and evil. They teach you to be mean in culinary high school. Weren't you just bragging that you killed a teacher? It was a fake death, and Klein had been breaking our legs for hours." She started to say something else teasing. He could tell she was going to buy the look on her face. But before she could, they were both distracted by a shadow overhead. Alden looked up to see two long swaths of fabric, one red and one yellow, undulating through the air. They danced around each other for almost a minute before tying themselves into a big bow and drifting down to hover above a man with raised arms. His name tag read, "Free Object Shaping." Natalie and Alden watched a family of two teens and two adults talk to the shaper briefly. When he nodded, they all climbed into the loops of the bow together for a photo. "That would be a fun picture," said Natalie. "Do you want? Or not, I guess." A crowd was already gathering around the shaper. Alden didn't know what he would do with a picture of himself sitting in a giant bow, but she sounded disappointed. "I don't mind waiting if you want to. It's all right. There's so much else to see." She was right about that. They passed a woman who was offering free pain relief and repair for injuries that were too minor to even bother going to a dispensary for. There weren't many places in the world where you could find a healer enjoying a day off by watching her adjust her sister roast chestnuts while people strolling by asked to have the ouch taken out of burnt tongues and hangnails. A Wright was demonstrating what went into making an electrical appliance run on enchantment. And a group of brutes, adjusters, and shapers were speed beautifying a couple of storefronts. Watching them work was better entertainment than a lot of the actual street performances. There was even a sway who looked only a few years older than the two of them, offering free self-control to procrastinators. The woman talking to him was telling him that she wanted to throw away some of the junk in her apartment. "Lobsters," Natalie said suddenly. "Where?" Alden looked away from the giant bubble he'd caught and preserved a couple of minutes ago. Someone was making them and sending them down the street. They seemed to be good old-fashioned soap bubbles rather than something magical. I just realized I might have to kill a lobster for one of my classes next quarter. You're right. The culinary arts track is more violent than the hero track. Do you have to do it even if you don't want to? I don't know. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. But I don't actually mind doing it. If you're willing to eat something. And some celebrations are about the meat being, you know, fresh. On other planets. What if I'm the person who makes the condiments for a traditional Artonan hunt? Or I get to visit a bunch of lorch when it's a night of emergence. When those little fish-looking things climbed out of their burrows, you'd eat one of those? Her smile was hesitant. Would it bother you if I said yes? Probably. Lorch are very serious about some traditions, and I wouldn't want to offend whoever had welcomed me into their village. If Alden recalled correctly, lorch stabbed those things with a pair of pointy sticks as they crawled out of the ground by the thousands, then gorged themselves on whatever was left of the previous emergence while they prepared the new ones for storage. I don't want to be invited to that event, he said, but it's fine if you do. She looked more pleased with that answer than he thought she should. Don't worry about what I think of your alien-tasting plans, Alden told her. As long as you have fun and stay safe out there. Running around in the dark with a pair of stabbing sticks. Everybody needs goals. She nodded and poked the bubble. I wouldn't call that a goal. It's something that might happen one day. That's all. Are you sure you haven't just revealed your actual life's purpose to me? She poked the bubble again, and he let it pop on them both. Her cheek dimpled. I have been worried a little bit, she confessed. I didn't think you minded me cooking meat all the time, since you're always talking about how good it looks and smells. But you're so dedicated to your diet, and maybe you were just being supportive because it's my skill, even though you thought. Until just then, Alden hadn't realized why she was going into detail about what kinds of animals she might serve up on platters to diners of various species. The vegan thing, he exclaimed. She blinked. No, he said. Don't worry about me being upset with you for that. I kind of fell into the diet. I haven't actually pondered the morality of it as much as I should have by now. But I'm seriously fine with you cooking and eating life forms that are below a reasonable intelligence threshold. Okay. Good. She said. I mean, I do think it's really nice how much humans care about animals compared to a lot of other, right? One of the better things about our species. In modern times and most places anyway. So about those lobsters. You do what you feel right about. And then enjoy eating them. Without me. That's what I'll do. They were both nodding at each other like something serious had been dealt with. Sorry for not catching on to what you meant faster. That's the place we're going, isn't it? Alden nodded toward a restaurant. The people exiting had their food in bags with the logogram for meal on them. That's it, Natalie said. The diet is inconvenient in a lot of ways. Alden added as they headed there. More than once on Thagun, he'd had the thought that a major eating restriction on top of a limited food supply could have been lethal. What if the lab had been stocked mostly with jerky? But it's been positive for me and others. I've tried so many new foods because of it, and a lot of them are way healthier than what I used to eat. And delicious. Your vegan nachos. I thought it was your magic making them taste better than the regular kind, but that afternoon when you made them for me even though you'd fatigued your skill earlier in the day? Still the best. At the compliment, she hopped ahead of him and spun to face him. It was a dynamic, graceful movement. One that caught his attention in the way that still happened often enough even though he was used to how the appeal worked. Making all the pleasant things about her sing louder to his senses. There it was in the way her hair gleamed in the sun, and also in the way her long legs carried her back 2 simple steps that were somehow so perfect it was like watching a fragment of a dance. "I might," she said, her voice warmer than the day they'd both agreed felt like summer, "have 1 pretzel for you in my purse. The truth comes out. You can have it later." "I have to wait?" "You do. I want you to actually enjoy this place, not be distracted by what I made." She pushed open the door, and they went inside. Line of asterisks. The drudgery chest was the heart of the restaurant and the source of the food. There were no chefs present. Instead, a chalkboard listed the current meal and thanked the people who trained the magical device to cook it. Alden and Natalie watched through a series of windows as knives chopped vegetables that then slid themselves onto pans. And as pans traveled to ovens, bouncing slightly like the person who the drudgery chest was mimicking had a spring in their step. An oven door opened and closed, a ladle dipped itself into a bubbling pot, and honey drizzled out of a bottle onto chunks of feta cheese. A couple of people did help the kitchen out by supplying it with ingredients, but according to Natalie, it could go on cooking this meal for a week with only the resupply and occasional troubleshooting of things like dulling knives or drifting pans. Then, when the owner was ready for it to do something new, it was retrained with an entirely different menu. 6 Argold bought a meal. There were no substitutions, and everything was served in carry-out containers even if you were eating inside at one of the booths or the human-run coffee bar. There were multiple small dishes included, so Alden traded his feta for one of Natalie's pitas while they talked about how full their new lives as residents of Apex were. She didn't want to discuss the night of the disaster and what had happened. Alden was more than fine with that. Instead, she told him about some girls she knew who were planning to break the record for making the world's longest noodle. Then they shifted to school drama. He told her about Winston once she asked if talent development had stupid conflicts like arts. She brought up Lute and Elijah, and he was prepared to offer the opinion that Luke Volra deserved a much better reputation than he had. But before he could do that, she suddenly leaped from the 2 of them to him. "You've never mentioned it," she said, "but did you have a girlfriend before you got summoned and everything happened?" Alden was surprised by the question, but maybe the surprising thing was that she hadn't asked before. After all, people who'd only just met you asked you things like this sometimes. "No," he said. "I've never dated anybody." "I'm surprised," said Natalie. "You're so mature and thoughtful." "Thank you." A tiny alarm had just begun to sound in Alden's head. He was going to ignore it. "But I'm not that mature." "You are, though." The tabletop between them was barely large enough for their spread of food. Beneath it, one of Natalie's shoes bumped the toe of one of his own. That, thought Alden, could have been a friendly toe bump. The kind of thing you do for conversational emphasis, like a fist bump with feet. Most people would probably have bragged a little about having a commendation. Or shown it off. But you didn't mention it in intake at all. Not even when the guy who Paolo brought over to our apartment said he wouldn't mind getting stranded somewhere if he got full pay and an apology fee. This is a small space, too, so accidental foot bumping happens. It was just the question about girlfriends coming out of the blue in combo with it that made it seem loaded. Natalie plucked an olive from the salad cup beside her and popped it into her mouth. "You just ignored him." "I thought he was so stupid, and I was going to tell him so." "He was stupid. But you were calm and collected about it." "Well," said Alden, "I suggested we all go play with my pinball machine so that I could beat him, so I wouldn't say I was 100% mature there." Her laugh was bright. "Did you hear about the commendation at school?" he asked. "I did. People in my classes know I know you, so they were asking a lot of questions." "Sorry," said Alden. "I expected them all to ask me questions, But it seems like most people are going to be semi-normal to my face and then grill my friends when I'm not around. Hoyu and Lexi got questioned by our gym class, and then I think the gym class is gossiping with the rest of the school. So far, all I'm getting personally are stray comments, and some people who didn't care about me at all last week are acting like everything I say is interesting. Or deep. Maybe you're being deeper than you realize. I don't think I am. There's this one guy who says I'm deep even if the most ridiculous crap in the world comes out of my mouth. I wonder if he thinks I'm scoring him on how many times he says it. You know, for the special commended person report I sent to the Triplanets every evening, letting them know which Chilean and North students are the best. Natalie gasped dramatically and put a hand to her mouth. The rumors are true. How is my score? Top of the charts. Yes. I knew I was winning. The window beside them was briefly shaded by a sheet of red fabric shooting by, pursued a moment later by a yellow one. They both leaned in their seats to watch the fabric weave wildly through the people walking past and then spiral upwards. That shaper has amazing control, said Alden. Another toe bump made him turn back to face her. She was wearing the sweetest little smile as she slurped lemon water through a straw. Oh. I mean, she's almost as tall as me, so long legs make her feet touching mine more like. The next couple of months are so full of holiday stuff, said Natalie, setting down her cup. Alden swallowed. Yeah. When I was reading the dorm notice board, I saw that a group of campus carolers is being put together. And Con, from my class, mentioned that his parents' ballet company usually does a special show for Lunar New Year. I don't know if they still will with everything being how it is. They'll probably do it better than ever, she said. Everyone seems to be thinking about showing their, and Isidorian spirit. The rabbit welcome is still happening. They just changed the location. And I've been invited to 6 holiday parties so far. That's a lot. They would be more fun if I had someone to go with. The alarm was no longer quiet. An entire brass band was blaring warning notes. Red lights were flashing. And from the rabbit welcome you can actually get invited to other events. It's called hopping, which I think is so cute. There's a pretty famous dance, too. So a partner for that would be the Alden. I don't think that fits in your mouth. Alden had just shoved 3/4 of a large pita into his face. This was a brilliant, subtle way to give himself more time to think before answering, according to the panicked diffuse that had possessed his body for a couple of seconds. Natalie looked disturbed. I'm the suavest man alive. Alden winced, slapped a hand to his mouth, and tried to chew. Line of asterisks. The things a person mentally typed into his internet search bubble while he was trying not to choke on, or spit out, a massive gob of dry pita in front of a girl whose toe bumps were almost definitely, probably, 99% likely to be flirting. Those things shouldn't be held against a person, in Alden's opinion. How to say no to going out. What is dating really? What is dating for teenagers? How do I know if I'm already on a date? What do I do if someone ever tries to kiss me? Specifically, what do people do with their tongues? Will my friend hate me if I pretend I don't know she wants me to go with her to a bunch of holiday parties? How many dates before you become someone's boyfriend? Percentage of 16-year-old human males who don't want to have sex today? How to swallow bread? He wasn't even reading the answers to any of these questions or clicking on links. Despite his ill-considered decision to shove the pita of delay into his face, he wasn't actually a socially hopeless mutant. He could figure most of these out on his own well enough to function under normal circumstances. Do you want some of my water? Natalie asked, holding the cup toward him. He shook his head and tried to smile at her while his jaws worked. Wow. Natalie Quire is asking me to ask her out. I think. She was, even now that he was used to her, so delightful to be around. And despite him wanting to be above and beyond such thoughts, some dumb part of his psyche was preening because it believed that an extremely gorgeous girl or guy liking him meant he was winning at. Alden wasn't even sure what. What even is that? It's not like this is something I was going for, and it's so bad that it's happened because what if I hurt her feelings? What do I do? How much do I say? And, even more soberingly, if he'd wanted to dip his feet into the world of dating right now, this afternoon. What came next? When did a boyfriend reveal that he was a wizard? When did he warn someone about that and everything else that went with it? Probably sometime after I actually figure out what the everything else includes. So maybe when he was 30. The primary seemed to think that was a good adult age. Wait, he didn't even ask out his own spouses until his sister. Why did you try to eat so much at once? Alden shook his head. Did I freak you out? I freaked you out, didn't I? Alden shook his head harder. I did. He waved his arms in denial. Natalie waited for him to speak. He ended up having to motion for her water after all to make it happen. Oh my God, Natalie, he said, when he'd finally cleared his mouth. I'm so sorry. I'm an idiot. I'll get you another water. Her smile was awkward. I thought maybe you were asking me out, he said. The words sounded crazy once he'd spoken them. He suddenly doubted them despite all the evidence in their favor. And so His face was burning hot. I loaded up on carbs. She blinked at him, then her smile widened, and her chest started shaking with a suppressed laugh. Alden groaned. I told you I wasn't that mature. It's my fault, said Natalie. I should have mentioned us going to one thing together instead of so many. And the dancing was. Natalie, I'd love to keep hanging out with you, but to be honest, I'm not in a great place right now for something more confusing than us just having fun together and getting to know each other better as friends. Confusing? Alden could probably have just said he wasn't ready, that he was still recovering from the year he'd had. Leave it simple and non-specific. But he thought she deserved more. Can we talk about other stuff until after lunch? He asked, looking around the busy restaurant. I want to tell you some things that are a little personal. The Nonagon would be better for that kind of conversation. Line of asterisks. Hovering above apex, legs dangling over the edge of the Nonagon, he told her more about Thagun than he had before. Not as much as he'd told Lexi and Hoyu the other day, but that was only because he didn't want to make the conversation all about him, and a full recounting definitely would do that. He told her enough to explain that he wasn't settled back into his life yet, even if he did an okay job of faking it. He brought up the fact that he was still back and forth to the Triplanets, seeing a mind healer, and focused on fighting personal demons. I'd be an awful person to date, I think, he said, trying to keep his voice as light and friendly as he could. She did seem more subdued than he wanted her to be. At least for now. Please don't hate me. I don't hate you. Or deprive me of your guacamole. Or send Elijah after me. He bumped her shoe with his own. His stomach clenched when he did it, and his hands tightened on the Nonagon's edge. He wanted to do something to show her he really thought she was great, and he wasn't just saying, let's be friends, as a brush-off. But what if it was the wrong gesture? She looked down at their feet for a few seconds, then swung hers to bump him back. He let out a breath, and she released a sigh of her own. I didn't think you were into me. Until recently, she said. Because you didn't act like you were most of the time. You didn't seem to notice me as much as a lot of people do. But then everyone kept telling me you probably did have a crush on me, and everyone who? Alden asked, startled. Hey Diza and Paulo and my mom and dad and one of my aunts and a lot of other rabbits from intake. That's so many people. What the? Your parents, too? I don't even know them. I mentioned you on calls home. Alden was perplexed. Was it because I hired you to cook for me? I think that was it for my mom. She couldn't believe another teenager would pay me that much. She thought my rates were too high. I would pay you more. This week. To prove to any doubters that your rates were completely reasonable for a professional of your caliber. I told her you were rich, hungry, and interested in fitness. My dad was different. Ned, you're such a sweet girl, but I want you to listen to me when I tell you there's no way a boy his age is acting like your friend without a reason. Alden wrinkled his nose. I should have said, yes, I know his reason, and that reason is my guacamole. He laughed. Instead, I started thinking they must be right, she said. I thought. You were so nice, and we always get along so well. And if you were just being shy or patient, then it was. But it turns out you weren't. The cheer in her voice was forced. They were both wearing their almost matching sunglasses again. He pushed his up onto the top of his head and looked at her without them. The day was beautiful, and she was being understanding even though he was sure he'd hurt her a little. I know you don't need one more person telling you you're pretty. But of course you're breathtaking. I have noticed. I regularly notice. Hot people don't really trigger. He couldn't find an unembarrassing word fast enough. Where had all the unembarrassing words gone? Lust for me, but I do enjoy looking at you. More importantly than that, you are such a good friend to your friends. You're fun and funny and ambitious. You made me feel welcome and normal when we spent time together and intake, which was an amazing feat because I was such a mess. I am such a mess. I have absolutely no idea what's going to be happening in my life 6 months from now. I'm trying hard to find myself. And I have no clue how to dance, but I will always be flattered that you ask me to. I will take you to do that, by the way. If I'm not busy and you're interested in spending time with me when you could be with a stable, hot, lustful guy instead. She slowly lifted her sunglasses. He felt like he was awaiting judgment. I think you're hot enough, she said. That was not the judgment he'd been awaiting. Do you really not want people? There it was. He wondered if she was thinking his rejection of dating was a bullet dodged. It's not like I'm opposed to having sex, he answered. I want to try it sometime. With the right person. I don't see hot people and crave them in that way. So far. But maybe I haven't grown into it yet. Or I'm someone who has to fall in love first. Maybe I was a late bloomer, and then Thagun shoved it back even further. Or maybe it's just how I am. He resisted an insane urge to go into further detail about his hypothetical future as a hover of sex. Thank you for telling me, Natalie said. And for calling me breathtaking. Just being honest about all the things. Since you were. Do you want to date people ever? She asked. I've always assumed I would. One day. But it's not a priority for me right now. I don't know what I want in about 20 different life directions. So I can ask you out again sometime, Natalie concluded. If we're both available. You'd still want to? Alden asked cautiously. Not if you put that much food in your mouth at once again. He smiled. You know. I would be a horrible person to date, too, she said. Not right now. But in the future. She left that thought there and watched him to see if he would pick it up. Because you're planning to spend most of your time off Earth? I want to see the universe, she said. I'm going to. I picked my skill and all the appeal because being a likable rabbit is the easiest, safest way to get out there. I probably shouldn't be asking people to date me when I've already jumped towards something like that. You'll still come back to Unzidora some. I know. I know it's complicated, too. I don't want to be lonely, but I chose this, and I'm still heading that way. Here, said Alden. Take this. Natalie reached up to touch her interface. Are you trying to pay me to cook for you again? She asked when she saw the gold he'd sent her. Always. But not with this. This is the exact amount of the Earth to Street connection fee. It's the most expensive call I ever made. Were you calling it Greivik? Don't spend it, okay? Said Alden. It's symbolic. It means you won't be lonely. No matter how far away you go, Earth and all the people here are only a call away. As long as the systems work. Natalie looked at her interface for a while, then back at him. Thank you. She didn't give him the special pretzel. She did go with him to the Pick Your Own Produce experience to collect fruit. And on the flight back to her apartment, just before they arrived, she hooked her ankle around his and left it there for a few seconds. The way Alden cherished those seconds made them feel like they lasted for a much longer time. Chapter 203 Wake. Awaken, my soon friend. Greater than Alden, wake up. The whispered urgings were accompanied by a soft smell like toasted and citrus fruit. Alden opened his eyes groggily to see that a lamp had been pulled out of the wall above where he lay. It was a glowing white box that made him squint and shade his face with an arm clad in the navy silk pajamas he'd bought during his shopping spree at Needle and Wheatle. The sight of the pajama sleeve reminded him that he was wearing them as Orient coverage, which reminded him more quickly than the surprise lamp could that he had gone to bed in the cottage at the art single quote H sibling hold. And the person whispering at him, using 3 different Artonian words for wake up, was his host. Alden rolled onto his side to see Stuart standing at the edge of the bed, holding a ceramic cup full of something steamy. Through the transparent wall behind him, the view was of a dark forest and a stream that flashed with seas. Alden checked the time. It was just before 8 in the morning on Anzidora, but that was a couple of hours sooner than he had expected to be up. He had gone to bed late and set his alarm to account for the time difference as well as he could. "This is so early for you, isn't it?" he asked. They'd spent a few hours together last night, quietly taking care of their own separate work. That had been a comfortable change of pace from most of their previous visits. Companionable studying, without either of them needing to explain difficult personal matters or worrying about how they were conveying complex subjects to a person with an alien background. Stuart had been catching up on schoolwork he'd missed due to veterinary duties. Alden had reviewed the instruction manual for the lab car and made a tentative plan for one of his nightmare Bakib kills. This one was the high preparation scenario in which he would lure the demon into a trap. When he'd thought of questions about the mechanics of the plan, he'd kept them to himself out of a desire not to break the mood of their study session. He could wait. Stuart was willing to be used as a sounding board and source of information, but it was too easy to spend hours doing nothing but using the knowledge in his head and the resources he could provide. He'd been busy practicing a spell that joined pieces of stone together, and he'd seemed to be enjoying it. "It is early," he said after Alden had climbed out of bed and accepted the cup of green tea from him. "I'm sorry to wake you, but something I was trying to make available to you has been made available in a less convenient way than I wanted. So we have to go take care of it now." Stuart was wearing a tannish brown turtleneck sweater and matching pants. He had 2 modes of dress that Alden thought of as normal for him. His black Leaf-Song student wizard uniform, plus or minus layers, and the tunics with embroidered belts. This was more casual than either. "What are we doing?" "Going to see a Bakib." Alden paused with the cup just shy of his mouth. "Really? It will be good for you to be in the presence of one and experience it with your senses. What should I wear?" "Whatever you can comfortably dress yourself in quickly," said Stuart. "If we leave now, I hope we will be able to spend time with the animal without encountering anyone else. Hope to see nobody, might see somebody. Petting zoo experience? That combo hadn't been covered by Tuck and All right. Alden took a sip of the tea. There was a piece of peel floating in it. I'll be quick. Thank you for taking the oranges to the house. He glanced toward the corner where the 3 large bags had been when he went to sleep last night. It was now empty. Alden had brought the oranges as a gift to the sibling-hold residents and a buffer for the fruit baskets he had made for Stuart and Embanar so that they wouldn't have to share. Everyone gets an orange, Embanar gets her own bananas, and nobody asks Stuart for a taste of his personal supply. That was the plan anyway. Last night, though, Stuart had been in a punitive frame of mind toward his parents, so Alden and the oranges had come straight here. I'm sure the were all utterly devastated not to be graced with my awkward human presence. You didn't eat them all yourself, did you? I put them on the gift to the house table. I hope they like them as much as you do, said Alden. Give me a moment to get ready. Only a few minutes later, they were headed toward the seminarium, the sound of their boots muffled by damp leaves. Alden wore the purple-brown shirt he'd arrived in yesterday. He'd opted to carry a Pesuva in his messenger bag, in case they did run into someone who needed to see the commendation. Where are we going to meet the Buckov? Earl had it delivered to the school, Stuart said in a tone that would have been worthy of announcing that his brother had had the animal shipped to the heart of a swamp infested with leeches. The Rapport school? Alden asked. Yes. Do you not like it? It's a wonderful school that provides an unmatched education. I do like it. Oh. Good. But you definitely don't like something about this, he thought. The Rapport campus is near enough that I walked to it on a few occasions with others, said Stuart. We started at the Inn household and traveled a whole day's ride to reach Route. Route. That's what the town is called. The school isn't far from there. Rapport has towns? Only one. This is the largest of the Rapports, but not the most populated. They'd reached the seminarium. On a whim, Alden held his breath. By the time he had to join another, they had arrived at a new location. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. This is the best seminarium I've ever been in. I thought you liked the Sky Chamber in Vathidia. I've been feeling sorrow at a small failing greater than for not letting you enjoy it on the way to Healer Yenus. And then on the way back you were addled greater than. She said I was fine. Alden protested before bending over to get a closer look at a description painted in dark pink on the floor. It was beside the circle of logograms and unrecognizable symbols the two of them had just arrived in, and his translation flashcards were helping him read it. This is for sending and receiving people of the true planets and people of the worlds that speak of our existence and hear us speak of theirs in reply, it said. He walked over to a more squarish patch of symbols, and he read the pink explanation nearby to see that this one was best suited for sending objects. The seminarium, which was large but still much smaller than the ones at the sibling-hold and leaf song, was full of many other informative delights, the names and origins of all the materials used to craft the room, a colorful map of the building they were in and the surrounding grounds, a sign hanging from the ceiling overhead that said, "Give proper greetings to declared Stuart avowed Alden of Earth." The sign faced a wall lined with windows and short, cushioned benches. That's where young students sit to wait for their turn to leave, or to listen to instructors explaining how seminariums function, said Stuart, tilting his head. I haven't personally seen others, but I think it's normal for seminariums in first schools to look similar to this one. We're in a first school, said Alden. Like Gwenlore's. The school here is for all ages. It provides a proper education until a student is ready to apply to a university. Classes for adults are held here as well, by request, but those are just as often conducted at someone's home. It depends on what facilities are needed and what everyone is in the mood for. Despite his willingness to explain, Stuart seemed antsy, so Alden quit reading all the helpful descriptions and followed him out of one of the room's 2 exits. It led them outdoors to a large patio tiled with rough stone and enclosed on 3 sides. Behind them, the building rose 3 floors to a flat rooftop with a railing, and then a bit further back, it rose several stories more in 2 squat, domed towers that blotted out the stars. To their right, a wing of the school took the form of a similarly shaped tower, almost as white as it was tall, with windows, most of them dark, looking down on the courtyard where the 2 of them stood. "The student house for those who stay on campus," Stuart murmured, taking in the direction of Alden's gaze. "And those are the roots of an unyielding greater than tree that grows farther up." He nodded toward the 3rd wall of the courtyard, straight ahead, which looked like packed dirt that had been pierced and latticed with roots. A person could have climbed it easily and found themselves standing on sloping, forested ground. The same trees that stood around the sibling hole towered here, their height made even more startling by the fact that Alden and Stuart seemed to be at the foot of a hill. Or so Alden assumed until Stuart led him out of the courtyard to a staircase set into the hillside, and he discovered that they were actually quite far uphill from the perspective of someone arriving on the other side of the building. The school had been built partway up a large slope. As they walked down the stairs, each step lit itself for them when they approached, then dimmed when they left it behind. To their left, the smooth, dark wall of the building grew taller. Before they reached the staircase's end, they turned aside and passed in front of the school, crossing a level front lawn to reach a circular patch of bare soil. An animal stood in the middle of it making snuffling sounds as it walked around a twig that had been shoved into the ground. Something that looked like a shiny coffee can was waiting at the edge of the bare area. While Stuart bent to pick it up, Alden stared at the backup. "That is one big, bioluminescent bison." He had looked at pictures of backups when they'd picked the animal as his probable demon. He knew it was supposed to be a simple creature that minded its own business and ate plants and grubs. So he felt ridiculous when the first thought that crossed his mind, after wondering why nobody had tethered it or fenced it in, was that it didn't look very evil. He wouldn't go so far as to say it didn't have an intimidating air about it. Size alone gave it that. But it looked a little funny and friendly when it acknowledged their arrival by turning to face them. The backup's head was more aardvarkish than bovine, with a mouth full of flat teeth and glowing blue drool that Alden got a good look at as it yawned, then went back to sniffing around its twig. Maybe that wasn't a yawn. Could have been a threat or a hello. Who knows how backups do it? The shine of the animal's body was faint compared to the light show in its mouth, but it was definitely glowing. Freshly licked fur. Over the past week, he had learned way too many fun facts about a relatively obscure alien animal. A whoosh sound accompanied the opening of Stuart's coffee can. Alden looked over to see him scooping out a fistful of something pale that flowed through his fingers like sand. "Is that food for it?" "No. It's grass seed," said Stuart. "I told Rill I was going to take you to a village full of ascetics greater than to see the backup herd, and he said that sounded alarming greater than for you and the ascetics. So I was going to have one the ascetics backups teleported to the sibling hold, and he said that sounded alarming for the backup. Then he offered to take care of it for me because I told him you needed one for your pursuit of healing." Alden hoped Stuart had explained a little more than that. Hearing that the human needed to have a meeting with a bison vark for his mental well-being wouldn't convince a large single quotation of Alden's normalcy. Stuart made an annoyed hiss-click sound. This morning I was awakened by a message from him telling me he had obtained this pregnant Bukov and that he expected me to come by and plant grass for her and accelerate its growth, so that the students will be able to watch her birth her child in a setting that resembles her natural one. She's an educational animal, so she's used to strangers. You can go closer to her, but don't touch her interesting stick. Alden had a lot of questions and comments. He started with the easiest. You mean the stick in the ground beside her, don't you? Yes. That's hers. It should be enchanted to provide her with comfort and entertainment when she travels. Bukov pacifier. Okay. Alden took a few cautious steps toward his unexpected educational experience, then stopped. The Bukov might not have had fangs or an aura of corruption about her, but she was still big enough to headbutt him back to the sibling hold or stomp him into an early grave. Hello, he said. You're a good Bukov. The best. You have never seen another one, Stuart said from behind him. Congratulations on the baby Bukov. Do you mind if I come a little closer? She doesn't. Look at her behavior. She is content with her interesting stick and whatever she just dug up with her snout. Stuart, the Bukov and I are getting to know each other. Plant your seeds. Alden had taken just one more step when the sound of Stuart casting made him look back. The spell was unusually conversational, and he thought a couple of the words sounded familiar. The system was even translating it. A spell chant containing lots of clear language wasn't common in Alden's limited experience. Symbolic sound, spell-only strings of noise. Porty loves hooting while he was healing Zeride and single quotation must have hid meaning, but it wasn't words. Yet, here Stuart was, telling the seeds in his hand about other seeds that had been carried by wind and various animals to find fertile ground in this land over the ages. Then he said, by my blood. Greater than, and tossed them over the soil. Alden sensed a presence around himself for a moment, not touching him, not about him, but definitely asserting something strongly in his vicinity. It was hard to tell in the dark, but he had the feeling that Stuart's handful of seeds had been dispersed more evenly than the throw would have done on its own. Stuart threw another fistful quickly, and this time, paying more attention, Alden noticed that some of the tiny seeds landed on him. He managed to catch one against his cheek, and he held it in his hand for a second as it slid through the gap between his index and middle fingers and then fell through, aiming itself for the dirt. Stuart closed the canister. Did you finish your grass planting that fast? Alden asked. Sowing on prepared ground shouldn't take any wizard my age long, unless conditions greater than are strange. I have a strong advantage on this land because my family has lived here for many generations, but a member of the wizard class has to be able to provide food and protection from weather, pest, and infection to enter a university. Schools have different ways of deciding you have satisfied that requirement, but knowing spells for planting and keeping fields are commonly among them. He set the container down, and walked toward Alden and the Bukov. Accelerating growth or growing food out of its season is more difficult. But this grass grows quickly anyway, and it's for demonstration, so it doesn't have to thrive here. It will be removed when she leaves. Alden watched him stride confidently toward the animal. Do I have your permission to use my skill on you if she attacks you? That's not going to happen. At least let the contract send you to a house of healing this time instead of bleeding all over the grass seeds while I fight her to get your arm back. The hand Stuart was stretching toward the Bukov didn't stop moving, but he did say, I was going to cast pleasant spells at you later to test your skill, but I think I should pick less pleasant ones. He placed the hand against a glowing haunch. Come here. How do you expect to end the demon in your dream if you won't pet a docile greater than animal? With a shield and possibly explosives, said Alden, approaching. I was trying not to make her nervous. I doubt she's ever met a human before. You were worried about that when you introduced me to other Alden, remember? He stopped beside Stuart, and the Brooklet only gave him a curious turn of the head when he reached out to touch her coarse fur. It was matted and crunchy instead of damp like he'd been expecting. So the glow lasts even when the drool dries. "Hi," he said, patting her a few times. She had a smell. It wasn't the powerful odor, but the funky, sweetish scent with blue cheese undertones didn't encourage him to bury his face in her fur. He walked around her for a while, trying to focus on the experience of being near her. Stuart said having real memories would make Yenupeth's job easier when they built the dreams. I'll reframe the situation and realize the nightmare is over. I'll realize I'm strong enough to take action and change the outcome if it were to happen again. Really realizing it instead of just comprehending it in a factual way, that was the goal. Eventually, when he was satisfied that Mrs. Bookup truly liked his company and had peaceful intentions, he squatted in front of her and looked up, getting a sense for how big she was compared to him. A few steps away, Stuart was using his Oreo, doing something to increase moisture content in the dirt. The Bookup stomped toward Alden, probably wondering why the visitor who'd been massaging her and talking to her had suddenly stopped and gotten lower to the ground. Alden leaned back just in time to avoid a rope of glowing slobber. Her snout, covered in dirt, came toward his face. He barely managed to divert it with one hand and catch himself with the other before he could be fully knocked onto his back. "I'm not dressed for wallowing on the ground," he told her in English. "Good girl. Let me up. Come on. Let me stand up. Please?" He managed it without getting filthy, no thanks to the Bookup, who had clearly decided that his face would be improved if her snout and tongue were in contact with it. "Instinct," Stuart said, finishing up with his Oreo and coming back over to watch Alden with the Bookup. "You were short and by her side, and you must have looked like you needed to have your fur washed." "I'm not a little Bookup," Alden said, rubbing her shoulder. "Sorry. It would be reasonable to imagine a demon that was once as she is now being directed by similar instincts, to protect the young, to be closer to them, to separate them from danger. Parental instinct." Alden's hand paused on the warm fur. "I know you told me how demons like that can behave. How they're what they were in some ways and changed in others. I understand. I've even been planning with that in my thoughts. But when I imagine myself back on Thagund, trying to protect myself and Kibby from one, and I think of what would happen if I failed. They're more like monsters. In your dreams, they'll be whatever you and he or Yenu choose. If you think it is more soothing for your sleep and your mind to kill a demon sharpened by rage and aggression greater than toward you, then you should do that. You don't have to complicate toward perfection greater than in this matter. You are in search of healing, not a future like mine. A future like his. Going to places worse than Thagund. Fighting there against chaos and the broken creatures it made. Dying there, likely, so far from home. How many people would search for a life like that unless they were ignorant about how bad it could really be? Or invested on the familial level? Some, I guess. Not many, I bet. I want to think about it the right way, and I am an avowed. So meeting demons is always a possibility. You are someone who will not turn your eyes from the chance that danger may find your world. Stuart sounded so satisfied about that. One who readies greater than himself for storms under skies that rarely hold clouds. Earth is fortunate to have you. Alden blinked at him. Giving me praise so grand that it induces vague feelings of distress about my obligation to my species is so on brand for him. You do remember that I was going to take the flyer off of Earth and save myself? Before the situation with the Radiant single quote H happened? I won't forget the story of your recent trial. I have contemplated it several times already. That was concerning in its own way. You should leave when leaving is suggested in a situation like that, Stuart said. If a world is lost, what good would come of being lost with it? You prepare yourself for terrible outcomes that aren't hopeless. I was thinking more about how I might eventually be summoned somewhere to fight demons than about Earth being lightly corrupted and me needing to fight them there. But yes, being prepared is good even if I'm not searching for a future on the path of highest intensity. I think you mean Onas. No, I'm pretty sure I said it right, Alden thought. They pethabakabf in silence for a while longer, until Alden was surprised by a sudden brightness. Stuart's pale aureate was laced through the fingers of one hand, a diffuse golden light shining from. Is that a modified version of the symbol of the lantern from my book? Can't I ask him if it is without it being way too suspect? Alden, said Stuart, drawing his hand back a little, which made Alden realize he'd been leaning closer to get a better look. Nobody should summon you to end a demon. He was frowning. Alden suddenly noticed how odd the Artonans' timing was for bringing out the light spell. They'd been operating by backup flow since they'd arrived here, and now the sky was lightening as sunrise approached. I think you would have difficulty finding a wizard who would let you kill a demon strong enough to be hazardous to you, Stuart added. That sounds like an exaggeration, said Alden. Your skill is lovely. I know you're striving to better it in ways that will make you a more competent protector. But you aren't as well gifted greater than for fighting demons as many other avowed. Not right now maybe. Not if you look at the profile that isn't true. Your father said I was very whole and implied I would spend some time doing scary things in the future. Slowly, Stuart said, how scary did you think it was going to be? Alden shrugged. I don't know. Now, thanks to her, he knew Genethart's H wasn't imagining him as some kind of super warrior who would get fired out of a cannon toward the nearest chaotic entity. But he couldn't say that his anxieties about being useful enough to warrant the primary's interest in the first place had disappeared. I'm not sure how to answer your fears if you don't tell me what they are, Stuart said. I'm not going to tell you all of my fears right now. Let's enjoy the morning with our bakabf. But some of your worries are probably my fault. They aren't. Father wouldn't summon you to fight a demon. He can do that himself. I know. You were very remarkable when you held me with your skill. I believe you have prodigious natural gifts that could help you to excel beyond the usual for an avowed. If that is true, then one day, when you are older, you could assist newling squads. Alden had been on the verge of a snippy insistence that Stuart drop it and focus on something else, but hearing, I felt your being, and it took me half a second to decide you were a prodigy, followed by, and so maybe when you're 30, adolescent knights might find you useful enough to have along, was distracting him. He wasn't offended or relieved. He wasn't even surprised, since he was getting confirmation of what he had already mostly known. He was just digesting it all. Too slowly for Stuart, as it turned out. He thrust the hand holding the aureate toward Alden's face again to get a better look at him. And, he said, working with knights would ensure that your gifts did not languish greater than or your growth stall. Noting your potential and deciding not to let it be wasted as a desire in opposition greater than to sending you to battle something beyond you. Alden squinted against the light, and Stuart dimmed it. I didn't think your father was someone who threw every single quotes at demons to see what happened. I kind of worried it a few times, but I never thought it was the most probable thing. But I still have to live with the fact that not every summoner will be nice or worried for my safety. He rubbed the book up again. So, just in case. Stuart was staring. It was the variety of Stu's stare that looked like it had volumes of thought behind it. Probably 100 new notes were being added to his mental profile of Alden to be contemplated later, Hopefully not with the help of Earth's internet. Don't think about it so seriously, said Alden. We're having an easy morning with each other and we should talk about this until I fully comprehend and appreciate your concerns. And then I will help you with them. I would rather focus on sorting my thoughts about demons. Alden could tell from Stuart's determined expression that the can of worms that had been opened wasn't going to be shut again until every wiggling problem had been pulled out and dissected. Gone were the days of them avoiding awkward topics, apparently, unless those topics were off-limits due to Stuart's oathsome sense of duty. He looked around for some kind of distraction so that he could have his intensity level 4 morning back. At least until sunrise. He just wanted time to figure out how to talk about his thoughts regarding summoning without outright lying to Stuart or leading him toward bigger questions. Lights. People. Over Stuart's shoulder, across the grounds, a line of lights had appeared on the staircase. They partially illuminated the shapes of those who carried them as they headed slowly down in single file. Stuart, there are some even irresponsible or despicable greater than wizards will have care for your safety from now on. Excessive care in some cases, I expect. I have wondered if it might not annoy you in the future to be deprived greater than of challenges that are a match for your courage. Alden looked back at him. You're worried I won't have opportunities for courage during future summonses? Some wizards don't have a proper sense of responsibility toward those who work for them, but most of them do care about their own reputations and what offending my family would cost them. It would be very stupid for anyone to ask you to complete a task inappropriate for your abilities and the REAB class. The scrutiny greater than if you ever formally complain about an assignment, or if you're badly injured, will be so zealous that all but the most powerful would struggle to survive it with their summoning rights intact. Stuart took a breath. The contracts may still select you for emergency summonses, but I do not like to imagine a day when the emergency is a demon on a world with a contract and you are the best remaining avowed for that task. Alden was suddenly less interested in changing the subject. Do you really expect my future to be all boring, save for every duties? He didn't know why it sounded more likely coming out of Stuart's mouth than it did when his own thoughts circled the possibility. He had tried so many times to convince himself that not running afoul of death and danger was also a potential future for him, but believing he could really have it. I think when you want battle outside of your dreams, you will have to rely on your school. Or you will have to tell me you're another knight. Someone who won't be afraid of my family. When I do? I mean to say, if you do. Of course. You are smiling. I've made you feel relieved. You have. Also, there are people over there. We should speak more of this if it relieves you. And I should tell you that the actions of worldly people? Stuart's eyes widened. He jerked his head around to see the approaching line of people with their lights. Quickly. He hissed, dropping his own light spell and reaching for Alden's arm. We will hide in the woods until they have passed, then run as fast as we can to the summonarium. Alden stopped patting the backup. What? We're going to run away from them. Yes. Unless. His face fell. He turned slowly toward the backup's head. And her Tonin girl appeared. One of her hands, covered in rings, was gently stroking the backup's snout, while the other was by her side, flicking through the gestures of a spell. Hello, Stu, she said. I'm happy to see you and very surprised you didn't notice me until now. Please introduce me properly to your companion. Chapter 204. Alden stood by the backup's haunch, glancing between Stuart and the girl who'd just appeared. He waited for an introduction that was taking a long time to come. She was still petting the animal's snout, but whatever she'd been casting with her other hand seemed to have been completed. The spell had no results that were obvious to him, unless magic was the reason that Stuart's posture and face had both gone so stiff. He called her Noan. I remember that name. Alden wouldn't have known her by her face alone, but he had seen her before. Noan had been there during the vision of the death ceremony that he'd been shown before he had decided to keep his authority sense. She was one of the 2 children Rallard had sent away at the start of it. Because she'd been crying. She wasn't now. Her smile was small but unflinching in the face of the ever-lengthening silence. A short, thick braid in a dusty shade of purple was draped over one of her shoulders. She had round cheeks compared to most Artonans Alden had met, and on one of them, 6 dots were tattooed in a curve below her dark eye. He looked for eye rings, since that would be confirmation that she wasn't a knight. He didn't see them. But that might be because they were the same color as her iris, or she could have a preference for something other than implants. Her outfit offered no clues either. It wasn't decorated with embroidery or studded with metal. A high-necked shirt was partially covered by a thick, woolly cape, and over her pants, she wore a long, skirt-like piece that split in the front from the belted waist all the way down to her ankles. The clothes were all in shades of gray and brown. Alden had time to analyze them and wonder about their significance because what had to be a full minute after her arrival and request for an introduction, nobody was talking. Stuart is broken. Should I introduce myself to help him out? I should introduce myself. Hello, he said. I'm Alden, this is Noan. Stuart blurted. She is. She's a former classmate of mine. Noan's smile dropped. And a neighbor, said Stuart. Her eyebrows rose to what had to be their maximum height. With whom I once shared happy youthfulness greater than. Stuart seemed to be taking in the eyebrows. And she is a very worthy and respectable person who has chosen to follow the path of Avitari. Her service will make the lives of all who know her closer to perfection. I believe. Alden had never witnessed an introduction more loaded with unfathomable backstory in his life. Noan sighed through her nose. You could have just told him my name and my role here, Stuart . If you're still angry with me. I'm not angry. Stuart looked away from her toward Alden so quickly that it was obvious he was something even if angry wasn't the right word. You just suggested running into the forest to hide from all of us. Noan, this is Alden, Stuart said in a voice that was calm enough, despite a blush that was growing more and more obvious. He is an avowed sworn to his planet's contract, and he has been commended for bravery and the absence of obligation by Tion Alisart . Noan nodded. I have heard of your actions and will remember them. He's also my guest at the sibling hold, recognized and welcomed by my family, Stuart said. We're weaving a friendship. She looked taken aback at that, but it only lasted a second before she hid it. Welcome to the first rapport, Alden, she said. And to our school. Would you like a cup of wevy? He prefers real wevy, Stuart said before Alden could get a word out. And we're going to have some when we go back to my house. Very soon. He's being so weird right now. Alden tried to smile through his confusion. He won't even refuse a beverage of welcome for himself when he hates it, but now he's rejecting them for me. What am I supposed to do? If your guest has demanding tastes, then of course we would be honored to meet them with our full hospitality, Stuart . Her pleasant tone was now too pleasant. I'll send one of the others to an orchard to climb to the most fruitful branch of the season and pluck the wevy just for the 2 of you. Our traditional duties as Nouvitaries aren't that important, after all. Stuart flinched. He opened his mouth. I'm not thirsty, Alden exclaimed. I'm so full of green tea, and so grateful to be at this beautiful school, that more welcome couldn't possibly sweeten the morning. Good, good. Interrupt whatever this is with poetry, he thought. Artonans like that. I am so very full of tea that my stomach sloshes like the ocean of my world did a few days ago after the spilling of a sinker's sender. He tried to back that mortifying simile up with a confident tone. If Kibby were here, she'd probably be worrying about the language capacities of his human brain. But it did make the other two look at him instead of escalating the multidimensional tension they seemed to have with each other. The looks were confused. No one shifted to understanding first. She gave a small bow, hands clasped in front of her. You rightly remind me that there is no place in our meeting for my childishness. You are a guest of Stuart's single quotation honored by our quaternary. I have heard of the recent difficulty on Unzidora. My welcome was not as focused on your comfort as it should have been. That's all right. Alden wondered if he'd actually conveyed some of that or if she was just really quick at glossing over awkward moments. Stuart was studying him again. Were you trying to rebuke greater than her? And me? He sounded worried about it. No. But I didn't want some busy person to go pick a webby for me, and it's hard to make up good comparisons quickly when my serotonin isn't perfect. Noan stepped toward him. You spoke so well. I'm sorry. I won't really send anyone to do that. It was exaggeration. Exaggeration is. She carefully described what exaggeration was and how it might be used by a person who was frustrated that her nice greeting had been met with rudeness that was surely accidental from Stuart. There were so many serotonin concepts and things about this very conversation that Alden would have liked for someone to talk him through. He was amused and exasperated to have her go into teaching mode for this. And maybe Stuart was attempting to keep the peace by not stepping in to say, humans exaggerate, too. He just compared his stomach contents to an ocean. He didn't mean it literally, you know. Thank you, Alden said when she'd finished. I understand. I'm so glad I could explain. She gestured to herself and then to the people who were spreading out across the grounds. They had split into groups of 2 or 3. Most of them were still carrying their lights. It's traditional for students who have chosen to become vitaries to walk the campus before sunrise and prepare the school in whatever way is needed. On days of rest like today, many of us who have already begun our education elsewhere return to show our always readiness to serve the rapport, and to receive instruction from any mentors who have come here for us. So they're all vitaries. Taking care of campus chores that required magic and attending extra classes on their weekends did fit in with his understanding of their place. Now that he knew they weren't assassins. Though Norin had approached them invisibly. Are you guarding campus? He asked. Is that why you were hiding from us? Yes. Why did you arrive so sneakily? Stuart asked. Maybe I did it so that you wouldn't hide from me in the forest. One of her eyes flicked toward Alden. That isn't important now. You're both welcome, but if you aren't able to greet the others with warmth and pretend proper enthusiasm for your current position as Mbinaret single quotations Valerie, Stu, tell me so. I'll explain your rush to depart in a way that won't press on their sensitivities greater than. Alden's presence will make it easy for all of us. Perhaps you had plans with him that can't be interrupted. A guest traveling from far away, very far away, may need your time. Stuart stiffened again. I didn't know that words about my service to Mban were flowing downstream from my own house. I had heard, but most hadn't, said Noen. They were excited to see your name on the veterinary duty list. You're on it for the next few mornings. It says you'll maintain this bookup's environment, and Quenyeth will feed her. I'm so much trouble, Alden thought. He just wanted to introduce me to an animal, and now he's roped into all of this? He tried to shoot an apologetic look Stuart's way, but Stuart's eyes were on the bookupf. He was subjecting the creature to an expression of betrayal that she couldn't possibly have deserved. The bookupf was too busy admiring her interesting stick to notice. Around them, The morning was quiet. Even the uppermost limbs of the trees, dark against the sky, weren't being rustled by a breeze. Alden thought the damp, earthy smell in the air hadn't been present before Stuart had cast his last spell on the soil. He shifted and looked down at his boots while he waited for something else to be said. "This is complicated." He knew that much. Stuart was more hesitant to talk about the adolescents who lived in Rapuri than he was to discuss the Leaf Song classmates he had known for less than a year. Which spoke volumes about how sore the subject was, didn't it? But he'd indicated that they were divided into those who excluded him because they or their families were worried about attachments that might end badly while they were dealing with their own first affixations, and those who he was avoiding because they wouldn't stop trying to change his mind. Norrin and some of these others must have been in that second group, right? They were happy Stuart was on the veterinary duty list. They were happy he was here. Because on the surface it looked like he'd taken a step back from the thing they thought would kill him. And they probably cared about him a lot, actually. Alden could even imagine that being overprotective of him was something they were used to, just like his family. There must have been a day when the younger Stuart first showed up at school with them, and he would have been someone who still needed gentle treatment. Before his choosing season and the period of private consideration, he might have gravitated toward other children who thought they wanted to be veterinaries. Like him. And then he announced he wanted something they thought wasn't even possible for him. Was it like he was rejecting them, too? Alden wondered, lifting his head and noticing two figures who were heading slowly across the lawn toward them. Only one had a light spell. They stopped, and he or she bent over to collect something from the ground. Were they scared and angry? Did they push too hard and make him explode? So many possibilities. He just didn't know. But no one seemed to be simultaneously happy to talk to Stuart and worry about what he might say to people who were, it seemed, not as good at rolling with the punches as she was. "I'm on the duty list," Stuart said eventually. He sounded just a little distant. "Role is so thorough." At some point, Norrin had started fussing with her woolly cape like adjusting the hang of it was very important. She stopped and let her hands fall. "A book for a special learning day is new. I think the younger students will be excited to see it." Stuart swallowed. "Quineth chose already?" Norrin nodded. She announced as soon as it wasn't much too hasty for her to do it. There was never any doubt about her, was there? I thought. Once or twice. Who else? He was turning his head, taking in the school grounds with a note in his voice that was a little sad. "Yeah. It's complicated." He wanted to run away from them, but he was curious about what choices they had made. He probably wanted to support them, but he wanted their support, too. Their whole lives revolved around one profound choice. They'd rejected his. And by rejecting it, they'd stripped him of the illusion that he was their equal. Everyone told me how proud they were of the adult I was becoming. They treated me like nothing about me was delicate anymore. And it never occurred to me that they were being liars. Stuart had said that about his family's reaction. It must have applied here, too. But he could cut himself off from people he'd enjoyed happy youthfulness with easier than he could his parents, siblings, and cousins. "Stu," Noan said, "many people have chosen since you were here last time. I can't tell you all of them and all of their reasons now. Quineth is almost impossible to wound, but Giller is coming with her." "What's he doing here?" She answered very quietly. "He's been here often lately for someone as busy as he is. He lets me lead the school veterinaries even though he has seniority greater than. I think as the age of closure greater than approaches for him, he becomes less certain of his path." "What's the age of closure? Who is Giller? Why are there so many Artonian words for seniority?" Alden kept the questions to himself because the two of them were both giving each other looks filled with meaning, and he didn't want to get in the way. "Giller's not like you," Noan said. "I know him well. He's been proud of being a veterinary for years. This is just something that happens sometimes, and his cousin recently. Why do you treat me as if I can't understand the most ordinary of troubles? No? You never did that before I made a choice you didn't agree with." They were both nearly whispering, but the lack of volume didn't rob the words of their frustration. Noan bit her lower lip and blinked at him. "I didn't intend to. I know Giller Helk doesn't truly want to be a knight. I know some people become regretful as the opportunity fades. I heard that his cousin lost her hope for one greater than, and he probably thinks she would be comforted if he could be more to her than a veterinary. I understand the same things the rest of you understand about choosing, and I have contemplated them for years. Stu, I didn't. I'll greet him and Queen Yeth, since they're already waving toward us as they come. Then Alden and I will leave. Because I also know I don't pretend with perfection. And I don't want to upset anyone here. You may say whatever you think is best about why I came early and left quickly." He said the last part so decisively that Noan only nodded. Neither of them said another word until the two figures Alden had seen slowly making their way here finally reached them. They were both wearing the exact same outfit as Noan. One of them was only 2 or 3 inches shorter than Alden, with dark skin and hair that was gathered at the nape of their neck in a ponytail. The other was a smidge shorter than Stuart, with a medium skin tone and white hair that sprouted from the top of the clip that held it at the back. The hair sprout bounced around even more than the owner did as they directed a woven basket with a short pinkish wand. The overloaded basket was skimming a foot or so above the ground, occasionally spilling something that looked like trail mix with a bunch of pale yellow slugs added to it. And they probably were alien slugs, now that Alden saw the ones that Talarartonen was tossing toward the ground in front of the Bacubf. They crawled around slowly. "Which one is Queen Yeth, and which is Giller Helk?" The taller one looked a little older in subtle ways. The shorter one had most of the food, and Alden thought they were female. But ever since the fiasco that was his assumption that Zeride H was a fussy old male butler, he'd been less confident when it came to the more difficult guesses. "Hello. Hello, Stu," said the basket director as the wand in their hand drew an arcane line in the air. The basket flipped over and began to spread the slug mix in front of a very intrigued-looking Bacubf. "Is that?" "He is. He is a human. I said it could be so, didn't I, Giller? When we spotted them from the stairs." Quineth confirmed. Alden gave her a small wave, and she gave him a huge one with a hand that held the wand. The empty basket shot 20 yards to her right. "You did," said Giller Helk, both eyes on Alden, "but there was no reason for you to think it was so from that distance. I've never even seen a human in the rapport." Quineth hurried over to Alden and looked up into his eyes eagerly. "Green," she said, her smile delighted. Stuart made a quick and quiet staccato sound that was basically an advanced version of and the girl glanced at him. "This is Alden," said Stuart. "He is an avowed sworn to his planet's contract, and—" He got through Alden's introduction and introduced Giller Helk as a very much less painfully than it had gone with Noan earlier. But the second Stuart's attention turned to Queen Yeth, she decided to jump in and introduce herself. "Hi, Alden. I'm Queen Yethwit. You may call me whatever is easy for your tongue. Welcome to our school. I'll be happy to show you around campus. What is your language?" "I know a few words in many Earth languages." "You do?" all 3 of the others asked. "English," said Alden, surprised himself. She clapped her hands together once, then held them clasped in front of her. "I have a candle made from the wax of a bee, with a wick of cotton, and its fragrance is that of vanilla." That was 5 words of perfect English, Alden said. "You said them very well. Thank you. The candle is in my room up the hill. Do you want to come see it? A candle? You may smell it as well. It occurred to him that she might think a vanilla candle made of beeswax was special. He was trying to figure out how to refuse without implying that they weren't, when Stuart stepped in. You have chores, Gwyneth, he said. I did the main one. She pointed one eye at the basket she'd just hurled aside and another at the backup. You have chores, too, Stu. You were on the list. This looks like a lot of work. She bent over and stuck her finger in the soil. Giller Helk was crouching down to do the same. Ah, Stu. You've already done it all, haven't you? I was excited to help you with it. He shook his head and stood again. I did bring these for you. Alden watched him pass Stuart a satchel. When Stuart opened it, a very recognizable woolly cape was visible on top. Alden tensed, but Stuart said nothing. One of his hands moved slowly to brush the cape. Even if you're only going to be with us for a small number of mornings, you deserve the clothing of your role, Giller Helk explained. He had a warm, buttery voice. Though there might have been a touch of uncertainty in it, it wasn't strong enough for Alden to be sure he really heard it. If you tell me when you're coming, I'll be here to walk down the stairs with you. Or back up them today, if you're staying until the sun touches the day start stone. I remember how you used to arrive early sometimes just to watch the procession greater than, and you've never had the chance to join it yourself. That's because he chose something else, thought Alden. He wondered what a large single quote H had be thinking, signing his brother up for this. Was it more about being practical and making sure the backup didn't burden the school with its presence? Or was the whole point of it to make sure that Stuart was forced to deal with these people he'd once spent his days with? Hey, maybe it's not about the very thing at all. Maybe he's trying to get Stuart to compare and contrast good Artonan's his age with his inconvenient new friend. He hoped that wasn't the main reason, but it could have been a part of it. Giller, said Noan, I think Stu and Alden have plans for today. We do, said Stuart, closing the bag. The older Artonan's smile stayed the same, but he slumped just a little. I understand. But I haven't finished the grass perfectly, yet, Stuart said. Another spell or two with your help might improve its growth. He looked at Alden like he was trying to apologize with his eyes. This is good if it's what you think you should do, Alden texted him. I can wait. You already showed me a backup this morning. Stuart nodded. Giller Helk was already talking about some spell he'd learned at his university. Noan was getting in on the discussion. Gwyneth was getting closer and closer to Alden like she planned to pick him up and carry him off. Do you want me to go see your candle now? He asked. Maybe Stuart could sort some things out if there wasn't an alien weighing his conversation down. His own affixation would be easier if he had a few people who were on his side, Alden thought as he followed Gwyneth toward the stairs. Maybe that was in the back of her large single quote H's mind, too. Alone. Alone was hard. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. After a tour of her room, an introduction to her candle, and a discussion about vanilla, Gwyneth, who'd hinted that she wanted to have her surname dropped hard enough that Alden had finally realized it, took him upstairs to the tower that held the school library. Along the way, she told him everyone else's business. She dealt not in terrible secrets of universal consequence, like Kibby and Stuart sometimes did, but in the everyday drama of rapport. On the one hand, Alden didn't feel like he'd be arrested for knowing most of it, but on the other, if he ever met some of the people she mentioned, he'd be unable to look them in the face. Should you be telling me these things? He asked as they climbed what felt like the 15th staircase. This one was a winding, glass-walled one that curved around the outside of the library tower. Don't you want to hear them? That was not a yes. He was about to tell her he would prefer explanations of what every single enchanted item they passed was, when she said, "I wonder if it's alright to take you up to the top library. You're a little young, aren't you?" "I'm sure I'm old enough for the top library," he replied immediately. She was planning to leave him alone there, so that she could run back to the seminarium and greet the person who she wanted to be a personal veterinary for. Alden was hoping they were talking about a room full of books on magic that he could just browse for a few minutes. Because innocent curiosity was not a crime. Humans age fast. And someone recently called me mature. She leaped up 2 steps at once, her white hair sprout bouncing. "The top library is my favorite. Someone will already have put first meal out for anyone studying there. Have you eaten? Other people will be there." His disappointment was immense. "Can't I change my library choice now?" The door at the top of the staircase was already drawing aside for them. It led into a small room with dark wood floors. Its function was immediately clear. Lines of tablets on shelves, wands in cubbies, a few drawers labeled rings, paper, ink brushes. This was where you picked up your study and practice supplies. And food was indeed spread out on a CD board, along with pots of wevy and other drinks. It was simple. Just cups filled with something that strongly resembled the trail mix the Backup had gotten for her meal, minus the slugs, and a fresh fruit selection. Quineth told him the trail mix could be eaten dry, or hot water could be added. "Makes it more like cereal, I guess." Alden took a cup because he hadn't had anything but green tea this morning. He shook some into his mouth while Quineth gave him a scattershot explanation of library rules. "Oh, it's salty. Salty, umami, and just a little sweet. Very crunchy. Not bad at all, though he could have done without the metallic aftertaste." Quineth left for the seminarium, and Alden took a minute to stare at the wands and open the drawers that held the rings. He wasn't about to take anything and try it out, but he didn't mind fantasizing that he could have found out what using a wand felt like if he'd had a guarantee that he was the only person in the library this morning. He ate another mouthful of the trail mix. A bite of something like bacon, but sour, took him by surprise. He examined the contents of the cup more carefully, trying to identify what that bite had been. And that was when he realized the trail mix was full of something that didn't look right. He poured some of it out onto his palm and held it directly under a sconce light on the wall, squinting at it. The mix was full of inch-long crunchy brown things that he'd thought were crackers. They looked a lot like tiny dehydrated fish, though. Crackers shaped like fish? Because it's cute or something. They even had a spot where an eyeball would have been. That wasn't very cute, but Artonans could be weird. Alden ate one. It didn't have the sour bacon taste. The fish cracker was more like the base of the trail mix, salty, umami, and a bad metal flavor that prevented it from being something he'd choose for himself on Earth. Umami's a meaty flavor. He ate another. This tastes awfully meat-like. He held his hand up to the light again. He pinched one of the crackers in half. This thing has bone-looking stuff inside it. Nobody would make a cracker with a tiny skeleton hidden in it. Hey, gremlin. Wake up. Are you alive? Did you die? It gave him its attention. Can't I eat this? Alden asked. Yes. Are you sure? Yes. He ate the one he had just broken in half. Still sure. It was totally uninterested. He pictured himself drinking hot cocoa made with sinful cow milk. And he knew he couldn't do it. What's going on? Minutes and about 24 taste tests later, another Artonan came up the staircase. It was a boy around Alden's age who almost face-planted at the sight of a human in his library supply room. Is this an aquatic animal? Alden demanded, holding a fish cracker in front of the boy's nose. Or does it just look like one? How are you here? The boy asked, both hands wrapped around his own long brown braid. Who are you? Is this an animal? It's your cue? A swimmer. A fish-like animal, greater than the translation said. A food native to Ortona, greater than Tobe continued.